Good evening. This is John Flannery. Normally we do a walk and talk, but today there was an issue, the Epstein case, that has specifically concerned me because the commentary is not precise. It doesn't describe the context in which the interview, for example, of Maxwell was done. It doesn't describe what was wrong with that entire thing, except in a kind of general fashion that people have some sort of conflict, and it's worse than that. It's criminal, in fact. And the delivery of the information on Friday was calculated to create this situation. And as the days pass, I expect people will get further and further away from the primary documents. So I thought it might be useful for those of us who care about equal justice before the law if I did a kitchen table analysis, and I'm doing it not for any, I hate the word performative, but not for any spectacular reason, except for the fact that if I shuffle the papers around as I talk to you, I can give you a more cohesive understanding, I think, of what's going on that's terribly wrong here. I mean, you sense it, but I want to put names on the things that are terribly wrong, that, as far as I can tell, have not been described in the fashion I'm going to do it. Now, number one, let's talk about the material we have to analyze. We have an indictment. We have a sentencing memo. We have the so-called interview of Maxwell by Blanche, a Justice Department tool, if you will, of Trump, who was Trump's counsel. And people mention that all the time, but there's more than that. So those are the items. And what I want to do is to give you the background of the charges, then tell you what Maxwell's role was, why we should be concerned about asking her questions now, and then the questions she was asked by Blanche, the context in which it happened, and why that was wrong as well. Okay, now I hope that's not too confusing, but I'm trying to make it, and I think my description of it will help make it. And I try and make this brief but to the point. Now, the indictment itself has a variety of allegations that I think concern us. And forgive me, I'm reaching around to get my hands on the document so I can talk about them. Okay, so there's an overview in the indictment, and the docket number is 20 CR 330. You can get this by going online and just seeking and read it for yourself, the entire document, but that's one thing you can do. The other thing I do with documents in a case that start going into the hundreds of pages, and I've been involved in cases with thousands and thousands of pages, is take your document, put it in your iPad, put it in one of the programs that immediately index the words. If you have a PDF, you can index it. So in other words, you put all the stuff in a file that is searchable. In other words, not just a picture of a page, it actually allows you to read the words. And when you can do that, then you can search a document very quickly and find out what's wrong with it. And if you want to do the exercise yourself, I'm sure you'll find other things because there's quite a number of pages involved here. So on the indictment, for example, it says, from at least on or about 1994 up to and including at least in or about 1997, Maxwell assisted, facilitated, and contributed to Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls by, among other things, helping Epstein to recruit, groom, and ultimately abuse victims known to Maxwell and Epstein to be under the age of 18. The victims were as young as 14 years old, and when they were groomed and abused by Maxwell and Epstein, both of whom knew that certain victims were in fact under the age of 18. In other words, you don't have deniability here. Now, in another place it says, Maxwell, quote, in an effort to conceal her crimes, she repeatedly lied when questioned about her conduct, including in relation to some of the minor victims described herein when providing testimony under oath in 2016. The government charged her with perjury because of the lies she told, the alleged lies she told in 2016. A prosecutor at the time said that he had no interest in talking to her, no interest in talking about cooperation. That was the Justice Department before the Injustice Department of Trump and Blanche and others. Now, the next page that I think is interesting is Maxwell and Epstein's victims. And again, we're still looking at the indictment. It says, between approximately in or about 1994 and in or about 1997, and do suffer, there is some repetition among prosecutors. I know, I was one of those guys. The defendant facilitated Jeffrey Epstein's access to minor victims by, among other things, inducing and enticing and aiding and abetting the inducement and enticement of multiple minor victims. Victims were groomed and or abused at multiple locations. And how they were groomed was they'd be taken out shopping, they'd be given gifts, we're going to help you with your career, we're going to do all sorts of things. Because there was a woman around, it didn't make other adults suspicious. The children were probably too young to declare what was going on, humiliated and embarrassed. We often hear, particularly in rape cases, and it takes years and years for people to come forward. So, and the indictment has pictures and it has more details, but I'm trying to do this in a summary fashion because this background is important to consider what the devil the interview was with Maxwell by Blanche. So, in and around 2016, in the context of a deposition as part of civil litigation, Maxwell, the defendant, repeatedly provided false and perjurious statements under oath regarding, among other subjects, her role in facilitating the abuse of minor victims by Jeffrey Epstein, including some of the specific events and acts of abuse detailed below. And I'm going to give you a couple of them because I think the frame of reference for what she is alleged to have lied about before, because she was convicted in this case and was sentenced to 20 years, they did not prosecute the perjury cases. But consider what they have in existing sworn testimony as follows. Question: did Jeffrey Epstein have a scheme to recruit underage girls for sexual massages? If you know. Answer: this is by Maxwell. I don't know what you're talking about. You can play the tape and hear the voice as well. But see, when they give you the voice, people sit there and listen to hours for that. That's not the way to find out what something is about when you can scan it and index it. And that's all I've done here. I've done it because I asked questions in the search that I thought I would find. And I'll get to some of those before we finish. But in terms of the logic of it, another question was, list all the people under the age of 18 that you interacted with at any of Jeffrey's properties, okay? And so what does Maxwell say? I'm not aware of anybody that I interacted with other than, obviously, the plaintiff, who was 17 at this point. I don't know what that means, but that's what she said under oath. Now, she was convicted, and it was a pretty sound conviction, and there was an extensive sentencing memo submitted to the court by the prosecutors. And one of the principal prosecutors was a professional AUSA by the name of Comey, and the name is familiar to you because she's the daughter of the former FBI director that also went after the truth and got in trouble with Trump. Trump can't you can't handle the truth. That's who Trump is. So let's go to in the sentencing memo, they identify a couple of the victims. Now, you can do this exercise with all the victims if you want. But here's the thing. If, in fact, we get to a point where all of a sudden I say, why don't I talk to Maxwell and ask her about this and go after some of the Johns instead of just her and Epstein, which is all this indictment was basically, although others are mentioned in the indictment. And so there are two instances among, I think, 7. And one is sexual abuse of Virginia Roberts. Now, I direct your attention to her for a number of reasons. One, she worked at Mar-a-Lago. 2, the story is that she was lured to do something she wanted to do, which was to be a masseuse, And that's where Maxwell came in, and I'll get into the detail a little bit. And then here's the kicker. We all know that Epstein died under suspicious circumstances. I investigated and prosecuted corruption cases in the Metropolitan Correctional Center many years ago. So I couldn't tell you what the situation is now. But when powerful people are involved and photographs that are misleading are offered as explanations and missing bits of tape are there, that's something you investigate unless you have an interest in it remaining invisible. So first, let's talk about Virginia Roberts. This is the government's summation to the sentencing court. Beginning in or about the summer of 2000, the defendant and Epstein, so that's Maxwell and Epstein, entered a new phase of their scheme to sexually abuse teenage girls. Don't get upset about the grammar. That summer, Maxwell recruited a 17-year-old girl named Virginia Roberts from the parking lot of Mar-a-Lago to provide Epstein with massages. Okay, now, you may remember from the public information we're getting, that Trump went out and said, oh, Epstein, he took one of my employees, and because of that was the end of our relationship. And there have been contradictions in the timeline in which he says this happened. But you wonder, was this woman who worked at Mar-a-Lago an essential employee, or was she something else? Now, that's a good question for Trump. It is a question that is amazingly injudicious to overlook. And it is and can be the reason that we're in the box we are, in which we're insisting that we get all the information they have and they're giving us the finger. So, over the next several months, Virginia was paid to provide Epstein with sexualized massages at his Palm Beach residence in exchange for hundreds of dollars in cash for each massage. Virginia also traveled with Epstein and Maxwell to other locations, including New York and the Virgin Islands, on Epstein's private plane. Virginia brought other teenage girls to Epstein's Palm Beach house. One of those girls was a 14-year-old girl named Carolyn, who Virginia introduced to the defendant, Maxwell, and Epstein at the Palm Beach villa in 2001. Thus began, so the government says, the pyramid scheme phase of the defendant and Epstein's abuse of teenage girls. Okay, so now let's talk about the 14-year-old girl. The sexual abuse of Carolyn. Carolyn visited Epstein's Palm Beach residence more than 100 times, during each of which she was sexually abused during paid sexual massages. Carolyn met the defendant the very first time she went to Epstein's house, and she interacted with the defendant multiple times thereafter. On Carolyn's first visit to the house, the defendant greeted Virginia, who introduced Carolyn to the defendant. The defendant, Maxwell, then told Virginia, you can bring her upstairs and show her what to do, after which Virginia showed Carolyn how to perform a sexual massage on Epstein. Carolyn performed over 100 paid sexual massages for Epstein when she was between 14 and 18 years old. And it goes on, and it's a longer statement, but you get the gist of it. Now, let's talk about Virginia Roberts for a second. She was available at the time of the trial. This was a summary of what her experience was. And in recent days, when the Epstein case has been the focus, a woman who had no cause living in Australia to be depressed. In fact, all accounts were that she was pretty comfortable and glad for her life. She committed suicide. So her connection to Carolyn remains in a transcript, but she is no longer with us. And if you think this sounds like the kind of stuff that amateur mobsters do, spot on. Okay, now, I have chosen a few pages because we're going on, and I don't want you to lose interest, because I think this is that one can do more than I've done. But what I did was I searched the document that I scanned and turned into a searchable set of words and so forth. And you may remember the public version, but let me tell you what actually happened in that room. The Todd Blanche, who is a friend of the counsel to Maxwell, they put together this proposition. So Todd Blanche as the Deputy Attorney General, but a man with a conflict who has represented a person, Trump, who has a distinct interest in this going away. He has a distinct interest in justifying pardons so it may go away. And Todd Blanche, in the deposition of Maxwell, said, "And my name is Todd Blanche. I'm the Deputy Attorney General. And before we start formally asking questions of Ms. Maxwell, I'm going to put on the record everybody that's in the room." And he does. Now, in my long experience, more than 50 years, of asking questions, first in the streets and then as a lawyer, prosecutor, defense counsel, I've done a lot, and I've been honored to have opportunities in the law. But I would never do what this bastard did. And the assistants that I knew in the Southern District and in the Justice Department, despite differences ones would have about policy and details, nothing compared to the outrages that are committed here. And that nobody on the air says, this is outrageous, this is an abusive process, this is a potential criminal investigation, and I'll get into that. So, did you know there was any agreement about the testimony Maxwell was going to give? I don't think so. Maybe. I looked for it. I didn't see it. I can't say it didn't happen, but so Todd Blanche, and there's some talk back and forth, says, "So, before we started recording, we met for a few minutes." Was that a few minutes? Was that 20 minutes? Was that 100 minutes? "And now I've told you that we're going on the record. And before we start asking questions, I know what you've been given by your lawyer, a copy of what's called a proffer agreement." Okay, so now this is not language that you would normally use, probably. I mean, you understand English, so you know it means something. I'm going to tell you something. Okay, when do you have a proffer agreement as a prosecutor? You have it when you're building a case and somebody says, "Don't indict me for 3 felonies. Indict me for 1 felony and 1 misdemeanor, and I'll give you cooperation that will justify you dropping the other charges and making your case." And the government says, "Well, how am I going to know that what you have is worthwhile?" Well, I'll sit here and I'll tell you, and then you make a judgment. Okay, so that brings us to a separate question. Blanche says to her, what this agreement does for you is it gives you protection. So what it means, and I'm quoting exactly what Blanche said, so what it means is that the government cannot use what you say today against you, with some exceptions, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then he goes on and says, whatever you talk about today, says it a second time, you have what's called immunity. So that means that the words that you say today, we cannot use against you in a case in chief if we were ever to bring one, okay? What's the flaw with that? What is the flaw with that? Now, I think it goes like this. If I'm Blanche in that room, I know what the indictment said. I know what the sentencing memo said. I know the sentencing memo said they didn't want 20 years. They wanted 50 years for what she did. That's the old Justice Department, my old office in the Southern District of New York. So I know that. And so I also know that she was charged with perjury. So she lies, and she's lied about material aspects of the very conspiracy that they're talking to her about in this meeting. So I'm calling upon a witness. I have a conflict because I'm really doing this for Mr. Trump. And then in addition, I am vouching for a person as a witness who's lied before, and I'm going to ask her about those things. Okay, so you see the picture. Now, the question, is there a punchline for this? And the answer is yes. Maxwell, let's see, how does it go here? Okay, 108. 108 is a page number on the transcript of the exchange, mostly between Blanche and Maxwell. On page 108, Blanche says, "Do you know whether masseuses from Mar-a-Lago Spa ended up giving private massages to Mr. Epstein?" Who are we talking about? Who is that? That's Virginia. That's Virginia who died by suicide. That is Virginia who had the conversations with Carolyn. Gone, right? So then he says, I'm not, and this is not the way you ask questions, by the way, I'm not asking for what you have read, but from, at the time, from your personal knowledge. Do you know whether that's true? Response by Maxwell, under oath. I don't recall. You don't recall? Now, what would I say at that point? I don't recall. How is that possible? You've lived with this case. You prepared for trials about this case. You were with them every day. You were involved in high numbers of these instances, and you don't recall? But I don't remember. I don't remember that, she says, so I don't want to. I don't recall that, but it's possible. Todd Blanche, doing his best reconstruction of her testimony, says, do you have a recollection of you ever recruiting a masseuse from Mar-a-Lago Spa to give private massage to Mr. Epstein? Now, Trump has complained about them taking her away from him. And the person who took, when I say her, we're talking about Virginia. The person who took Virginia away from Mar-a-Lago was Maxwell. And Trump claims that based on somebody being taken from his Mar-a-Lago workplace, he therefore ceased all relations with Epstein, which is not true, but that's a whole other thing. So what does she say? I've never recruited masseuse from Mar-a-Lago for that, as far as I can remember. I can't ever recollect doing that. Okay, but what do you hear? What do you hear when she says that? Now, what's the problem? She just said something that contradicted the evidence. She just lied with immunity, but she doesn't have immunity for lying. She has to tell the truth, and she didn't. And she was questioned by a man who knew the truth we know. What is his obligation here? His obligation right then was to warn her that you have a right to have counsel present, however incompetent this asshole may be who's sitting here. And I should be arrested for impersonating a Justice Department employee because I am not doing anything that's investigative. I'm trying to create a proffer that clears my former client, still my current client, as as being a member of the Injustice Department. So now keep this in mind. Now there's more. It's been a long time. Let me see if I got this right here. 108, 109, 107. You know the pictures of Trump and Epstein and Maxwell. Now this is a sign of a lawyer. He's no prosecutor. The question is, you're in some of these photographs. Yeah, she says yes. Todd Blanche as well. Those all appear to be social settings. He says that. He leads her to that. He is preparing her to say, yeah, sure, because it works for her exculpatory stance in this manifestation. Well, I see I'm going on a little bit, and I have to say that is one of the things that I do. But here's a kicker. On the second day, they all come back. And I'm just going to focus on one of these. And you can go through them. I know there are for certain others in here. But here's the one. On the next day, starting at pages 217 through 219, Todd Blanche says, "Good morning, Ms. Maxwell. How are you?" And Maxwell says, "Good morning." And Toad, "Good. So the proffer agreement we signed yesterday, there's a place on it for us to all kind of initial." What is he doing? What is he doing? He is saying that the document that she just contradicted the day before wasn't initialed and they didn't sign on it and they didn't agree to it. Why? Because they want to not have to act upon it to prosecute her for perjury. What are they doing there? And then she says, here And he says, right there. Oh, it's okay. And then Todd says, and then Mr. Marcus, her attorney, will, and he says, yes. And Todd said, initial as well, thank you. And just to this is Todd Blanche speaking, before we get going, I just say that exactly the same folk that were here when we met yesterday are here today. So I'm not going to do formal introductions, blah, 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 blah. So then we get into it. So I think the easiest thing to start with, is there anything we talked about yesterday that we're going to go through some more names? I think that's one of the places that we were interrupted just because there are lots of names. But aside from additional names, is there anything you want to kind of follow up on that we talked about yesterday, or anything you thought maybe you remember more of or not? Does that sound like a prosecutor to you, or does that sound like saying, you better correct that shit you said yesterday because that was a lie, and you're going to embarrass all of us and screw your own deal and screw me, and I'm going to lose my bar license? That would be a positive thing. So Maxwell says, some more names did come to me in the night. She couldn't remember things the day before, but now names have come to her on little message pads. I don't know. And I did have some additional memories just for clarity. I believe I said that I couldn't think of anybody who I may have asked for Mar-a-Lago, but then I realized that the allegation at least is that I met, deleted, in Mar-a-Lago. And so I felt that I needed to address that. And I didn't want to leave that hanging because that seems weird under the circumstances. And also, but I couldn't remember anyone. And maybe it's a long period of time. So the issue is not that I'm trying to not say, but I don't remember anybody that I would have. But it's not impossible that I might have asked someone from there. Blanche says, I don't know exactly what you said yesterday. Really? Really? He doesn't know what was said the day before. If it wasn't so important, it'd just be pathetic and you kick him in the ass and go down the road. But this stuff is destroying America. This highway robbery of justice, turning our law enforcement into the injustice department, is not acceptable. So Blanche says, I don't know exactly what you said yesterday, but I don't think what you said yesterday is different than what you just said. So yes, what she just said is, I'm not sure I remember it, but I want to remember it enough so you can't prosecute me for perjury. But when you say I don't recall and you remember everything else around it and new names the night before, the I don't recall defense disappears. Do you think this Justice Department is going to investigate and prosecute this? Do you think they're going to say you shouldn't get a pardon because of it? What do you think? And then she says, okay, I just didn't want to feel that I said no to something that and Blanche says, blank definitely has said that she was working at Mar-a-Lago, whoa, and that you received a treatment from her at some point, and that you recruited her to meet Mr. Epstein. And then she says, right. Blanche says, do you know affirmatively whether that's true or false, or do you just not have memory either way? Maxwell, I really don't believe it's true. Whoa. She wants to have it both ways. I don't remember it, and it's not true. But I know that I did go to spas, plural. And if I met someone, I did ask if so I don't, in the realms of possibility, it could have, but I have no memory of it. Okay, we could do more. The bottom line is this woman lied under oath, that the prosecutor led her to that lie, did not correct it, and knew before he put her on the witness stand under oath that she was going to lie. Because if she was going to say anything exculpatory of Trump and of their abuse of children, he knew that. Or he came there and he had no idea. He hadn't read a single newspaper, single document, the FBI report, any of the reports, anything. And our coverage of this event is like this was a regular proceeding. This was not. This was corruption in plain view, out there so everybody could watch it, and then published on a Friday so we could look at it. So I've gone on a little long. I apologize. It's about 29 minutes. I had fun discussing it, and I hope I transmitted at least my understanding of how this is not working, unjust, not different than the ordinary, but actually potentially and almost certainly criminal. Thank you. Bye-bye.